Hello and welcome in this video. I'm very happy that you took time to listen to me. I'm Lauriane. I'm the founder of Open Source Economy. It's a nonprofit based in Switzerland, and the mission of Open Source Economy is to make open source work better. So that's a huge topic. So that is why for the first season of this podcast, we will focus only on solving the funding problem of open source, which is already quite huge. But we will try to solve it. The idea of this podcast is basically to build and solve this problem together with you, if you would like. And we will, update you on what we tried, what succeeded, what didn't, what we want to achieve. And so the idea is really like to be transparent and to work in very open source way, right? With a community that every time here to brings idea to help to, so every in open source way, even though if you're not doing an open source software. And I think that's very important because, first of all, you can help us if you want, it can be something very small, like it can be like you put a like, you subscribe to the channel. That's something which very help us, even if it is very small for you. Or you can do something bigger. You will see like in the next episodes, but we will be helping a concrete open source project. So maybe you have connection with enterprises that are using this open source project. Maybe you can make an intro, this kind of help. Or you can also help us to build a website. You can bring ideas. So basically any help is welcome. And I think it's only together as a community, software engineers, that we will solve the problem of open source. And if we solve it, well, I think that will be beneficiary for a lot of us. So I think it's in our best interest to work together. And so that is why we're doing that in public. And then maybe the last stuff why we're doing that in public is because if someone doesn't stand with where we want to go with our values, etc., well, they can do something else, and then learn from our mistakes. So that's also very important. Okay, so that said, the first season, as I said, will be like about funding open source. So I think for this first episode ever, I think it's very important first to understand where we're heading. So we will present you what is the situation of open source, for example, about funding, like what is is there really a problem with funding in open source or not. And then we will present you also our values, what we're trying to aim, etc. So that, you can bring first ideas, you can criticize, and then basically we will be all aligned for the future. So let's start. So some numbers about the current open source landscape. You will see the numbers are very impressive. So there is 90% of enterprises that are using open source. So there is 76% of code bases that are utilizing open source. There is, based on GitHub, 50 million developers, 370 million repository. Of course, not everyone are in use. I think it's a bit bumped up by GitHub. And then for the funding part, guess how much is the open source market? Guess it? I think you are, completely false. Probably I was at least, and I was completely underestimating the market. So the market was $24 billion in 2023. So it's mostly about providing services. But it's becoming bigger and bigger because it is growing 13% per year. And it is supposed to reach $44 billion in 2027. And that is absolutely huge. And that already is the most conservative number that I took. So absolutely impressive. So based on soft numbers, we're a little bit wondering, okay, but why? We're every time hearing about this funding problem of open source. Why they don't have money if there is a market of 44 billion? Well, for that, we need to understand a little bit the history of open source. So open source was started in the 80s with the free software movement. So the free software it is free as freedom, not free, you don't need to pay it. And then basically it was all a movement about why we need to build a software that respects some values, some philosophical values. So, and it was all about the freedom of the user. There is a very famous sentence of Stallman that says that software do not need to control the user, but it is the user that needs to control the software. And I mean, in the 80s, 90s, I mean, it was already relevant, but nowadays that we have all the software, after like a Snowden scandal that, we know that government companies are spying on us, basically like manipulating us. I think those values about it is us who needs to control the software and not the software who needs to control us. I think that's absolutely huge value to have. So afterward, there is also other values that we can fight for example, software sovereignty, like data privacy, etc. But yeah, as a summary, open source started as a fight for values, right? But the problem of that is that while there was no business model associated to it, and there was no investors, and so people got funds through various means, grants, universities, this kind of stuff. And despite like very low funding compared to the competitors like Microsoft, for example, open source started to be absolutely huge and critical for a lot of enterprises. The most, like the example that everyone knows is Linux, of course. Linux managed to, become absolutely critical for most of the company on this earth, because like a lot of companies are running, like their product on Linux servers. And so that was like absolutely like, if you look at the history back at that time, like there was a huge fight. For example, there was like people from Oracle that was like purely, that was criticizing a lot Linux and, and this free software movement, etc. Until they realized, well, it's better to embrace it rather to fight for it. So they was starting from the 2000, a slow shift first in the naming. So we were not speaking about free software because it was referring to the value, freedom, but we're speaking about open source because in the word of open source, there is no value associated to it. We don't know who is controlling who, right? Like not like in the free software where it is a user who needs to control the software. Here it's basically like a marketing washing, if I can say it like that. So the first step that they did is marketing washing. Then they started to acquire a lot of open source projects and companies that were running open source projects. And then, like the venture capitalists came in. On that, I have very cool graphs that show this evolution, but you can see that from the 2000s, the venture deal really started to grow, and the size also. And so that led to a lot of scandals. I think if I start to name them, we will be here in the podcast for 1 hour. But there was a lot of scandals about like a company that decided to close source, to change a license. There was so many things. Maybe you can list the one that you're the most pissed off about. But yeah, there was a lot of scandals. And so basically, we enter the era of commercialization with open source projects that are controlled by centralized entities, mostly companies. And those companies, at the beginning, they were controlled by the funders, so like people that usually are caring a lot about open source values, about the community, etc. But more the time is going on, more, like VCs, big corporation, they take the control. Like we saw, like example, like MySQL is now under Oracle, GitHub under Microsoft, like all this kind of example. And yeah, just to be clear, I don't blame at all so much this shift, because I think it's a little bit like natural, right? It's very natural shift. Because when you don't have business model, you don't have investors, well, you don't have income, and that's very, very hard to live, to compete, this kind of stuff. So I think it was, like we're in a capitalistic world, and so the natural way to establish a business model and to have investors is to create a company. And I'm sure that a lot of software engineers and open source engineers that started those companies, yeah, they had very good intention. I really don't blame them. Like, it was the easiest way to do. And then, it's just, like when you are an individual and you have good values, but you are in a system that doesn't share those values, usually the system is winning, like almost all the time, because the system is way stronger than individual. And so that is what it is, right? A company is centralized, so doesn't it's getting against the community. The community cannot have control. The one that has control is the one that have the shares. And yeah, that is just like not the correct fit for open source, but that was the most natural one. So if we look at the funding problem of open source, well, then it becomes clear that it depends on which category you are, right? Because if you decided to have an enterprise, then it's very easy. Either you have enough clients and enough investors, and then you survive, and then you are part of this 44 billion service market that we're talking before, or you die, and then you don't have any engineers to build a product. Or the second part is if you're standing for like more toward the free software movement, then you can be very, very successful. You can have a lot of users, you can have a huge community, etc. But you're lacking funds, and you don't have enough money usually. And there is a lot of open source developer that cares a lot about their community, that care a lot about the values, about their users, and that just burn out because it's too hard, right? When you are not paid, when you need to compete against the second model that here, I mean, I'll show you again the stuff, but like funded, like very well funded, is very hard to compete. So motivation usually is not enough. And I will say more, it's becoming less and less enough, because like software start to be like way, like a bigger than before, like way more complex, like with a huge community, etc. So when you're like not having enough fun, it's very hard to survive. So that said, at Open Source Economy, what we're trying to achieve. So we're going to achieve the best of both worlds. What we want to do is to have business model, maybe investors, or at least backers, financial backers that are here to help the project and to take a stake in it and this kind of stuff. But the most important thing is like, we don't want to compromise on the values, and we don't want to compromise on the community. So it would be every time community first, values first, and then we will have some business model, we will sell products or whatever, or service to enterprises, we will have financial backers, but we really don't want that it is that the money controls the project. Otherwise, we will just better create an enterprises, right? It is what an enterprises is for. That is a setup for money is controlling. Like, we don't want that. Money, like people that has money, like enterprises, financial backers, they should have a voice. They should be listened, but like the control is not coming like entirely from their side. Like, what we want is that the community, like basically is the community who control open source project, and community include financial backers, include enterprises, but include a lot of other people. So it would be all about finding the correct balance for the governance. Decentralized governance, but efficient governance. And maybe last thing before to move on, I personally don't see this situation as black and white. No. I think there is very good stuff in both of the models. Of course, funding here is the most important, in my opinion. Community and the community decentralization and values is the most important here. So that really is a tool that we want to combine. But if we look more how it is like open source projects are run under those two models, well, there is also some benefit here. For example, like when you are run by profit, etc., by the users that are paying, usually you make choices much faster, like that are more impacting like a user positively. You can be also more bold in your decisions, and try new stuff that the user don't consciously want it, but at the end is beneficiary for the user. So all this kind of stuff, all this mindset, I think it's very positive in this model. While, for example, if we want to say the counterpart here, usually project governance tend to be very, very slow, and they start to be a little bit like, idle. Like some of the projects have this kind of problems. But then if we take the opposite, it's like at the end when it is community control, like the community will not do anything which is bad for them, right? Where here, yeah, we saw a lot of scandals that was destroying a lot of ecosystems. Yeah, so yeah. But just to make a note. Okay. So now that we have that, how we are going to achieve the best of both worlds? Well, I'm going to tell you our plan. So we have a 3-stage plan. So first of all, we want to unify open source a little bit, to have like one platform where it's easy to implement a business model, it's easy to implement a great governance, it's easy to get financial backers. For enterprises, they have like only one interface. I think it's very important because right now, I don't know if you are using Project A and Project B, well, you need to go to Project A website, company, I don't know, like where they are, like a foundation or whatever, and then Project B, and then you have Project C, the same, so that's, it's all completely split apart, and that's a little bit like complicated basically to build something that works for every project and for the community. Then it's also very important to have like one place where open source project can be, because open source project doesn't have the same visibility. If you are a very big open source project like Linux, it's easy to find funding. If you are one, like very deep in the dependency trees, you will never have any funding. And so basically, if we implement business model and get backers money in one platform, then basically what we can do is like to make a deal with all of those projects to say, well, every time there is a project which is very visible on top, who is making money, that's normal that, like one part of the money that they're making is flowing through the dependency tree so that everyone can make a living out of their work, and even more is like basically like every project can be maintained, and basically like all of a sudden there's a whole ecosystem will become way more sustainable. So that is the advantage of having like one platform. Of course, this platform is non-profit, community controlled, etc. So that's basically why we are a non-profit. If you want to be part of our governance, you can be. Just write a comment, I will contact you afterwards. But it's really like we're here at the service of open source projects. But if we want to win, like better to be unified than all alone in our corner. So now for the concrete plan. So we have a 3-stage plan for our platform. The first one, so that is what we're going to concentrate on in our podcast's first season. It is a monetization of open source projects. Right now, if you are a developer and you want to monetize your work, well, you need to figure out everything. You need to set up your own enterprise. You need to sell like your service. You need to do your own marketing. You need to, yeah, I mean, you need to do everything to deal with the tax, etc. Like, I mean, it's very complicated, and there is a lot of open source developers that don't want to get any income just because of this reason. So here, what we want to do is really to have a platform where we have a ready to go business model implemented. Like developer, they can come and say, oh, me, I want to do that, I want to sell that, I'm ready to do that and not that. Everything is done for them. They don't need to figure out anything about the tax, etc., etc. So that is what it is about monetization. And monetization, like we will start by implementing the most obvious business model, which is service. So service, it's like you get paid for bug fixing, new feature, you get paid for support, to answer to questions to the community. You can also get paid for production support. So here you need to answer very fast, like you are basically on call. For advisory services, like all this kind of stuff. So it's like the one that I think we will focus on at the first. But then after, for later, there will be other business model, right? Like we can have double licensing, SaaS subscription, etc. And here, what is very important to say is that, money is really not bad if the money is at the end at the service of the community and at the service of the open source project. So that is why we're a non-profit, and all our all our project needs to follow that, because when you're a non-profit, you basically, all the money that you receive needs to be spent for the project and the good of the project, more or less. I will not enter in this kind of details, but that's the spirit. And then once you have that with developers that get a business model ready to go for them, very easy, they only concentrate on monetizing the work that they already do. Well, there is a question directly that arises. It could be very basic question. It's like, how do we protect our IP? How do I hire someone else? How do I pay my tax? How do I buy some servers to test, to make a testing architecture? All this kind of question needs to be answered and also ready to go, like very easy for open source engineers. Then also here, what's started to be very important is like, paying an individual, I mean, it's great, but it's not a solution. Why it is not a solution? Because like the other competition, proprietary or commercial open source, they have funding, they have investors. And if we want to compete against them and not die, well, we need to be at least as good as they are. And motivation, it's a huge source of being great. But when we are speaking about like millions, billions on the other side, motivation is not enough. So at some point, we need a little bit like to work as an enterprise. That means that there is like several people that are hired for one project. Some of the people will take care about delivering the services for which the open source project will be paid. Part of the money go directly to the open source project that do the work, but part of the money go for maintenance, go for innovation, go for hiring like new people that will do jobs that no one wants to pay for it. So that's very important. That is at this stage. And the last of which is very important at this stage is, as I was already hinting you, we need to have a governance model which is efficient, community-based, democratic, and decentralized. And it would be hard because like we will have a lot of people that want to control the project, and well, we need to have a governance model that works. So that we will focus on that at this stage. And the last stage, it's the financialization. So that's basically like how we can like attract financial backers that wants to have a stake. And this part, for example, is very important if we really want to compete against proprietary software. In proprietary software, how it works is like you have a startup, you have investors that take a share of your company, and then you have money, and then you can deliver the project quick. How do you do that in open source? If you don't have a company, you cannot. So that we want to deal with it. This part is very complex. We will need to use decentralized technology. You can read, like more documentation on our website for now. I will not delve into it because it's too complex, and also is optional because if open source project doesn't want that, well, they don't have to implement it. But then once we have that, all these 3 stages, we basically transformed open source projects into I would like to call it decentralized companies. Maybe decentralized and democratic or community-based companies. Basically, you have business model, you can have financial backers if you want, but you have everything to run as a company. You can have like all the tags, IAP, everything is managed for you. You can hire people basically, as if you were a company, but everything is non-profit, community run, respect the values. Oh yeah, and you have a business model also, like a company. And I think that is it for our plan. Maybe something that is very important to understand is that if we have one platform, that would be very visible in the open source world, then we can start to implement something that is at the stage of a dream for now for the open source community, which is to have, we call that label. But usually in the open source world, I was hearing more like to have a tax for open source, so that open source is financed through tax, which is, in my opinion, a bit hard to implement. First of all, because like open source is decentralized and the tax come from the government, which is more or less centralized, so hard to mix the two. And then also because we, open source economy, we are not the government, so we cannot do it. So we will try to do it like as much as we can by establishing a label. So label is getting inspired by the environmental labels. If you don't know, it's basically like like non-profit that are specializing in protecting the planet, the nature, or whatever, something in this domain, and then they sell as a label, their label, to enterprises that care about their image. And so, and in exchange, so they get the label, the enterprises, and they give in exchange a percentage of their income. So that basically this percentage of the income will be spent on protecting the nature. So that is what we want to do, like for open source. Basically sell a label, open source economy, to enterprises. Those enterprises will utilize it for branding, recognition, etc. We will get part of their fund, and we will use it for open source and open source only. That is it. So maybe the last thing that I would like to say in this first podcast is about the values that we're standing for, because I think it's something that the community cares a lot, and that can create a lot of conflict. So it's better to be clear from the first episode, so that if you're not agreeing with those values, you can move on, or you can try to argue that we're wrong. We can also change our mind, especially now at the beginning. But what I can tell you is like what I think personally, that I care a lot about decentralization, about the community. And when I say the communities, it needs to be very balanced between every member of the community, that no group should take the advantage. I care a lot about software sovereignty, data protection, user freedom, especially in our world, like when it is like, like when we know that we're everyone is spying on us. I think that more, that's the most important stuff ever to try to find a model for software that will allow us to have control of our software. And like, and even more, I think like we software engineer, I assume you also are a software engineer. I think like we have this duty of building a world that is meant to be protective, like for our co-citizens. Like if I take my friends that are not open source developer, my parents that are not, like they have no clue about how a software is working, how it could work with open source, how open source could save them to be, like to have all their data like collected, all this kind of stuff. They have no clue of that. Sometimes they even don't know that it is a problem, but they will, like, like it's like every time as a society, every time there is a problem, you don't know it until it is too late. And right now we are like, depending of your country, we are like more or less in a democracy. It's more or less problematic to have a huge control of software. But one day, we know history, one day it will be very problematic. And yeah, we will, I personally, I will, I will not want to be in my tomb and know that I will not have done anything to try to build a better future for everyone in this planet. So yeah, I think that is it. I think I forgot some values, but like I think you can really like understand what I'm saying for it a bit. And like we still need to formalize everything. For example, that is something, if you're interested in the philosophy of open source, you can come and help us. But for this first episode, we don't have anything concrete. We will start the concrete job, so by implementing monetization for one open source project for the next episode. Maybe you're a user of this project, so yeah, please subscribe. Please at least watch the title, like to see if you're interested in it. And yeah, I think I have to tell you, like, to have a nice day, and that is it. And see you at the next episode. Ciao.